This is Hannibal from thehannibaltv.com, and joining me today on the Great North Wrestling Podcast, we have Jeannie Clark, who was better known as Lady Blossom in WCW when she was managing Stunning Steve Austin, which was my favorite version of Steve Austin. And she was also married to Billy Jack Haynes at one point, and she dated Chris Adams, who you have. I forget if it's one or two children with Chris.
I have one daughter with
One,
Chris. She's
okay,
37.
and two daughters with Steve.
Yes, Stephanie and Cassidy.
Yes, and it's Cassidy that lives with you.
Cassidy does, yes.
Yeah, and Stephanie is the
Lives
one
in
that's out in
Washington.
LA.
Yeah.
And they're both gorgeous, but thank God you kept them out of the wrestling business. They haven't been corrupted.
Yeah. They haven't actually shown any interest. Uh, they both got their own interests. Steph's in the fashion business. She works in Beverly Hills. She's got a lot of clientele. She's a stylist. And Cassidy is a taxidermist. So when she was little, she used to go with Steve actually to the taxidermy place because he used to hunt. So she kind of grew up around it, and she is doing really well, making her own little creations. Matter of fact, she just sold clothes to Nikki Bella last week.
Oh,
But
wow.
she dresses them. She doesn't design it, but she dresses a lot of celebs and just regular people. She does really well
And
on Red Dead.
you have a book. We're going to put it in the description of this video. It's called Through the Shattered Glass, and it's available on Amazon. And there's more details on your daughters in there and your family and your entire career. That's correct, right?
Yes, that's correct.
You were kind enough to send it to me, and I really enjoyed reading it. A lot of great information in there.
Oh, thank you.
What was your
Actually,
favorite?
it was therapeutic, the book, for me. So it was good therapy because when I was in rehab, um, I was in counselling myself for well all day. We'd be in the class for about 7, 8 hours a day, and we would be encouraged to write things down. So when I came out of rehab, I had like a ton of notebooks. Oh, you've gone. There you go. And I just thought there's so much of myself I've written down that it would make a good book, just for closure almost as well for me.
So you were talking about rehab. One of the issues you actually are very open and honest about in your book is you had an issue with some pain pills. I guess Steve, at one point, all of his injuries, like he had a broken neck, knee problems, he had a lot of access to these pills. So I guess you were taking extra amounts for a while.
I think it was easy for me to get them. Not, I didn't have to rely on Steve to get any. I got them myself because there was a lot of mock doctors anyway that I knew. I think with any drugs, they can be quite progressive. What I mean is, when you first take them, they feel nice or you feel nice. That's probably why people take them because it makes them feel better. But then as your tolerance to them grow, you tend to take more to get the same feeling, and then you get on to the wheel of addiction. So yeah, it's quite progressive.
I guess probably one of the low points in your pill addiction, I guess, was that time where you ran off into the forest that you discuss in your book.
Yes, yeah. I didn't just run off. There's a bit of a story there. That um in my book I mentioned that um basically we moved into a small town called Bernie, Texas. There were some neighbors that I didn't get along with at all.
They were
And
racist or something, right?
you see, I'm from the UK, so I don't really understand that small town mentality of that. That seemed to be quite alive and well in that town. Not everybody, but I kind of said, look, excuse me, guys, but I please don't use the N word in front of my kids because I don't want them to say it. Because to me, sometimes you can grow up and just pick things up as a kid. Um, they didn't really like me, and I didn't like them. But there were times when they would harass me, and I don't know who it was, but I would get these calls like, oh, we're going to kill you, or crazy calls at 11 p.m. And they'd drive down and shine their headlights through the windows, and it really frightened me. And as they were doing that to me, I actually really got afraid of them. So I went in. It's true. I went into the woods that night. I was very, very desperate and afraid. So that's why I did it, because in my mind at that time, as I write in the book, I felt that I was in some kind of danger.
And the one weird incident that I read in your book regarding those people that I guess they became close friends with Steve because they were all into hunting.
Yeah.
Um, but Steve didn't necessarily agree with their language either, I guess, but they were friends nonetheless. I don't know about.
That's correct. They were hunting buddies. Steve obviously was very, very busy and he needed to relax. I understood that. So when he would come home from his extremely busy schedule, and obviously he was on top then, and so he had a lot of pressure on him, his best way to unwind, and they only lived a couple doors down, and they would go into the woods and they would do all the hunting. I personally don't hunt. I it's not my thing, but uh, they they were the people that clashed with me. And I forgot your original question. Sorry, what did you
Well, I
ask?
was talking about the woods thing, but you actually made me recall there was another incident where I
Yeah,
guess they actually tried to have you committed or something without anyone's
yeah.
knowledge.
Well, you know what? No one's ever asked me any of these questions. Basically, it was Valentine's Day. I had a couple of roses in my hand, and they were meant to take me to pick up Stephanie and Cassidy from where they were having a Valentine's party, and I thought they were fine. I got in the car with them. They drove past the exit, which obviously frightened me. We I start saying to them, "What are you doing?" And they started throwing a beer at me, like a can of beer, and have a drink, have a drink. And I knew at that point they were being hostile. And like I say, we never clicked anyway because I didn't agree with their racism. Um, as we passed, as we carried on going, um, they were being extremely cruel to me. We did actually get to this rehab center, and I was fine out that day. And I recall we went into this little office. There was a really nice lady there, actually, long dark hair, and I remember she just kind of winked at me. And I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I've been brought here against my will. I had these roses still in my hand. I meant to pick up my children." And Ricky and Sandra start screaming, "She's in La La Land, and we brought her in here. She's have you still got me on there? I know it's my yeah,
Oh, you
yeah.
on my end, you're
Sorry,
showing
sorry.
loud and clear.
They were screaming at the lady, "You need to keep her here. She's this, she's that." All these really bad comments. "Give her a blood test," or words to that effect. And I said, "That's absolutely fine." So I said to the lady, "Well, I'm agreeable, just give me a blood test." So she said, "No, no, we don't do blood tests here." Well, I said to her, well, if you don't mind, I'd like to leave because I've left my children and I need to pick up my children from their Valentine's party. And she said to Ricky and Sandra, well, Sandra, I can't keep her here. So basically, I picked up my purse and I walked outside, and they called the police. I'm sitting in the back of their truck and I'm looking like in their mirror so I could see behind me. And they're waving their arms about, going crazy. That she needs to be committed. Uh, you know,
They've been drinking and driving at this point.
I don't know if they were drinking. I
Okay.
don't know if they were drinking. They had beer in the car. They were throwing it at me. It's really mean. And I'm sitting there for about 15 minutes. It's been about 15 minutes. Finally, I get out of the car, out the back of the car, and I walk up to the police officer and I said, look, excuse me, officer, I've been brought here against my will. These people, the rehab will not accept me to go in there because they find nothing wrong with me. So the police officer's really nice as well to me. He goes, it's all right, sweetheart, just go get back inside the car. So I did that, and then they say to the police officer, sorry, we can't take her. We can't take her, arrest her. The rehab won't take her. You need to take her home. And at that point, I asked him if he would take me home. I said, would you please drop me? He said, I can't. I can't, sweetheart. They're going to take you home. So what we did next is we drove to my friend Mary, where the children were at the Valentine's. I get there, Mary opens the door, I see my kids. They're only about 4 and 7. And the next thing, I was going to ask Mary to take me home, but Ricky and Sandra come into the house, snatch the kids, and take them away. And of course, I'm devastated. I actually called the police. I called the police and explained, these two people that live 2 doors down had snatched my girls, and the police go. The police. I go home, but the girls aren't there, and the police. I had to suggest that I call a lawyer, of which I did, and what happened next was the children had been taken to Steve's mom in Edna, Texas, which is a good 2-3 hour drive from San Antonio. And then the police forced her to bring them back. But she didn't bring them back to me. She took them to back to Ricky and Sandra's.
And
And
you
then I
go
had
through it in the book. You didn't have the best relationship with her either over the years.
to look at it. It's difficult because, see, Steve had got married to Kathy during. Okay, so Steve and I met at the sportatorium. We were dating. He told me he didn't want to get married, and he was sending me a lot of letters. And I really believed that he wasn't in a relationship that he wanted to be in, which obviously he wasn't. Um, his mom and his ex-wife Kathy had put an awful lot of money into this really big church wedding that they had. So I asked Steve, well, so you want to stop seeing me? And he said, no. And I bet, but my mom would be upset. Long story short, I was pregnant and Steve called his mom the day before Stephanie was born. We knew when she was going to be born because it was a C-section.
Yes.
And the day before, he's, Mom, I've got something to tell you. And I'm really, really, upset. I wanted you to be proud of me, blah, blah, blah. But I'm seeing a girl and she's pregnant. And she said, well, when is this baby due? And he said, tomorrow. Well, because she hadn't known about me and Steve and the pregnancy way up till the day before I had Stephanie. And if you'd like, he just got married to Kathy. So I kind of look bad in her eyes. Technically, she came to Atlanta, where we were living at the time, and she met with me, but I don't think I was possibly, it was too much of a shock. So I really tried, but I don't know if she really took to me that well. I did try, but I think, she didn't want me. Basically, she Steve asked me to get married, which was a little bit later after Stephanie was born, and she said, "Well, we'll just go by." She said a Carol Little suit, which is like a nice little suit. But you see, I'd been to the church to ask the pastor. His name was Tom Kaplan in Douglasville, if he would marry us, and at first he said no, no, not without counselling. And I kind of said, well, my fiance, he's on the road all the time, but I'll take counselling. I wasn't happy to take counselling, but after talking to him for several weeks, my pastor at the church, I decided I wanted a church wedding, and I didn't want to wear a Carol Little suit and get married in the house. I wanted to go buy a wedding dress. Steve was completely fine with it, but not many of his family really came to my wedding, actually just Beverly and her husband. But I wanted to have the experience of the church wedding, which I thought would be really nice. And Steve says, no, that's fine, that's okay. But I don't think that, I don't know if it's because they just had a big church wedding with Kathy, only just a year before, I think, or something. But I am grateful to her for coming to Atlanta, and being there with me, with the baby. I would really have tried to get along with her, but I'm not sure that she liked me. That's all.
And of course, if you hadn't been married to Steve Austin, it may never have been Stone Cold Steve Austin, because you were the one that gave him the idea to go with the Stone Cold name. He could have been the Ice Dagger, or Frosty McFreeze, or one of those names.
That's such a funny day when those texts came through to the house, because Brian Pillman was on the phone, and it was really funny. We were in hysterics. But basically, Steve actually saw, or we were just flicking channels, and he saw a show about, what was his name now? It was a show on
Jeffrey
that.
Dahmer, wasn't it?
No, no,
No.
it was another guy, mafia kind of hitman, Lewinsky or something. Anyway, so anyway, he watched the show and he liked that idea for a character of someone really cold. This show, this guy just went around killing people and sticking them in a freezer, something like that. And that after The Office sent all the ice dagger, etc., etc. See, me being from England, we think a cup of tea is a cure-all for everything in this country. If you get in a car accident, oh, we'll make you a cup of tea. Oh, I feel really ill. Oh, we'll make you a cup of tea. So it's really common. And me being a big hot tea drinker, Steve used to drink it because he was married to me, and he was sitting on the end of the bed, and he was like, "Oh, I just really don't know." He hated the ringmaster, and I said, "Look, just drink your tea before it gets stone cold." And then that's where I went, "Oh, there you go. There's a good name for you, Stone Cold Steve Austin." And it started kind of him seeing that show, and me drinking tea. So it's kind of cool.
And I don't want to go into the details of this. You go into it in your book, and I'll plug it again here at Amazon.com, Through the Shattered Glass. But for obvious reasons and for reasons that people don't know about, you and Deborah didn't have a good relationship, and you didn't think too highly of Deborah over the years. And for those that don't know, she used to be Mongo McMichael's wife. She was in WCW. Then she came to WWE, and I guess a short relationship took place between Deborah and Steve, and they were married for a brief period. But you had some dealings with her that.
Well, honestly, I didn't know Deborah. I never heard of her. Um, I had no idea. The first I heard of Deborah was when Steve and I split. Was her? I saw a Jeep and her. She had the ironing board out in the kitchen. So as I was picking up some of my stuff, I noticed her stuff was in the house that Steve and I were living in. As far as knowing her, I didn't know her at all. Um, um, that I didn't actually think there would be a problem getting along with her, to be honest, only because, as you know, I have a daughter with Chris Adams, and I was very, very, very good friends with his wife, Tony. I was possibly a bit naive because I probably would have thought that the relationship I had with Chris and Tony and Jade, our daughter, could be, you know, if Steve were to pick up the girls, I could say hi, Deborah, and stuff like that. Unfortunately, she did not like me, although I would have been really willing to work with her. What the problem ended up being between me and Deborah was um, I was living in Dallas, and there Steve actually phoned me up, and he said to me, "There's a show in Fort Worth, a TV taping in Fort Worth. Uh, bring the girls." So he asked me to take the girls. He phoned me and asked me. Now my girls, they used to like making the signs, like the signs you hold up.
Yeah, that was
You
popular at that time.
Yeah, yeah, you know, and they had their glitter and they had their glue and their crayons. So about 4 p.m., just a little time before we were going to get in the car and go to the show in Fort Worth, the girls were going to see their dad. Steve phones me back up and he goes, "Oh, I'm ever so sorry, don't come tonight." And I went, "Oh, here's a problem here because the girls have made their signs and they're excited. Now you're going to make me look like a heel. But I tell you what," I said, "I'll bring them to the show. We'll sit in the bleachers. You don't have to see us. I'll tell the girls you got an injury, whatever. But I'm not going to let them down and not take them to the show because that will just break their heart." I go to the show and sat way back in the bleachers. After the show, I'm thinking, okay, fine, we'll go home now. Someone with a t-shirt on, it just had crew written on it, so I didn't know who it was, except it was somebody who worked there. Goes, Jeannie, come here, come on back. And oh, Steve's changed his mind. He's going to want to see the girls now. So see Paul Heyman, and he goes, Jeannie, come back. So I'm like, okay, great. So Steve must have decided that he's not going to let Deborah tell him he can't see his own kids. So we go back. Steve sees the girls. See Hannah's there, and they see him briefly, but he did look a little quizzed. He looked a bit like, "What are you doing here?" kind of thing. Come to find out that the people who saw me brought me back, like Paul Heyman and whoever the crew member was, without Steve actually knowing. So anyway, that's fine. The girls see their dad. We're leaving, ready to go to the car, and here comes a woman like power walking towards me. It's Deborah. So she grabs Stephanie by the forearm. "I'll take the girls to see their dad," she said. And I went, "No, no, they've already seen him." And I said to her, "Do you have a problem with me being here with my kids or the kids seeing their dad?" And she got right in my face. She said, "Yes." And I just took Steph's arm away from her, and I left. So when I got home, Steve phoned me up and he said he apologized. He said, "I'm really sorry." He said that Deborah left him at the arena and he had to catch a ride with Hannah to the airport or the hotel, wherever, and that she had taken the keys to the rental car and left the building because I was there with the girls and she had told him to tell me not to come. That's the point there that I didn't think that the relationship of all three of us would work, as in you have the girls on the weekend and this and that, because Deborah wouldn't allow that. Like Tony and I had a great relationship with that. So that was the point that night. I can remember sitting on the couch after Steve phoned and apologized, and I thought, this is not going to work. This, because I signed a Texas order to stay in the States, and I was in Texas, and I was completely willing to stay in Texas as long as it meant that Steve and the girls could see each other. But Deborah just wasn't letting that happen. So yes, there became an issue between us and a couple of other small things, like I had to call Steve about tax, something to do with our taxes, where he paid 1 year or I paid the other year, and sometimes something to do with the girls, whether it's something in school or something at a soccer game. When I would call, I'd say, Deborah, can I just talk to Steve real quick? It's important. She said, I told you not to call. He'd click, put the phone down. So I don't get it how, if you're marrying somebody who's got kids, how you block that relationship with the kids, because she felt very, well, I don't know, jealous or threatened. But that's where that whole thing didn't work, and so I came back to England. No, I was only actually meant to come back to England for 3 weeks, and then 9/11 happened, and I remember Steve saying to me, do not get on a plane, and I said okay, and then I didn't hear from him for about a year. So yeah.
And there's a lot more details of that in the book.
And that's all true, you know. I'm the type of person, like with Tony, I tried to reassure her there's no romantic feelings between Chris and I, but because we'd known each other since we were teenagers, Chris and I were friends. We were always friends, and I reassured Tony, you know, and we became best friends. Um, but Deborah didn't have that same attitude as Tony towards me, so it was difficult, very difficult.
And that didn't end up being a long relationship, and it was controversial towards the end, but I don't think anything came out of the some of those accusations. But I do have to ask you this, and I just because you saw that thing I did with Billy Jack Haynes back at WrestleMania weekend, and I can cut this out if you don't want to answer this, but you didn't make any mention of it in the book. Billy Jack Haynes was saying, "Oh, Steve Austin, he's a wife beater. He had my ex-wife after me." Obviously, you guys didn't get along, and there were some emotional issues, but you never had any issue like that with Steve, did you?
No, no, Steve, no, I don't believe Steve's violent towards women or wife beater. He never ever hit me, just make that clear.
Yeah.
And the whole thing with Billy Jack and Steve must have come out after my book, because my book was 2016 and I don't have any recollection of there being an issue, you know, till like after the fact. But no, I've never found Steve to be violent at all, not once.
So that's just Billy Jack, I guess maybe a little bit of jealousy that even though you guys broke up amicably,
I
right?
think the wife beater was referring to Deborah, because that's the only time I've heard.
But he was never actually, nothing ever came of those accusations formally. Like those accusations were made, but there was never any actual court situation over those accusations.
But with Deborah and
Yeah,
Steve.
yeah.
No, I think she dropped the case, but I'm not very familiar with it.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to, I don't want to get into that anyways, because as I said, I just wanted to bring that up because Billy Jack had made those accusations. I'm positive Billy Jack Haynes does not know Deborah. but you may have talked to him in recent
I
years.
haven't spoke to Billy Jacks in 30 years. The
Oh, okay,
last time
really?
the last time I saw or spoke to him would have been 84.
Right.
So I haven't had any relationship with him since then.
And he basically was in a marriage to you so you could stay in the U.S. It was
No, no, that's not true.
okay.
That's not true. Basically, I okay, I had some issues with Chris. We came to the States together. We drove from Los Angeles up to Portland. What happened was in Portland was pretty much a bit of a party town up there, and Chris started to smoke a lot of weed, but Chris was a bit of a ladies' man, and he kept cheating on me. That's the truth, and we didn't like have pages or mobile phones back then, and sometimes he would leave for the matches and not come home for like 2 or 3 days. I couldn't drive, and I
You
had
didn't
just
have
had a
money for
baby.
food either, right?
Well, he left me some money, but basically Chris was cheating all the time, and I was very, very, very well. Not only did it hurt my self-esteem, I was only what 22 years old. It made me feel really bad. Well, Billy Jack told me he was cheating. He said, but he said he'd asked Chris about it, and Chris had said, well, it's like if you had a steak every night, occasionally you would like a piece of chicken. Billy told me that Chris said that, and then I got it that Chris New Year's Eve was actually he asked me to. I actually cooked a lot of food on New Year's Eve, and Chris never came home for about 3 days, and I kind of like was so angry at Chris, and then Billy said, "Well, I would be happy with the steak," words to that effect. And look, we'll get you a car, we'll get you driving, and if you think about it, I didn't have any family. All my family were in the UK. I really didn't have any friends. I didn't drive. I was alone in an apartment in Portland, and the only and my boyfriend was cheating with. I mean, girls would call the house all the time, and Billy was like the only person I had to talk to at the time, and he was nice to me at the time. So I thought that he was being really sweet. And so I didn't say, "Oh, I need a green card." I just thought I need a friend, and we did have a relationship. We didn't really like fall deeply in love, or it didn't end up lasting. But at that time, 30 something years ago, I literally didn't have anybody else to really turn to. So I said in my book that I was really grateful to him because he seemed to care at that time for me, and I had feelings for him back then.
I see. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time today. You gave some really good answers. Maybe we could do another interview down the road, but I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. You're through the Shattered Glass book. I'll put the link right in the description of this video. I highly recommend it to people, especially if you're a Steve Austin fan, because there's so much behind the scene details of Steve Austin from your long term relationship with him, but also, as you mentioned, you go into great detail about Chris Adams, some detail on Billy Jack Haynes, and just your life in general. And your life could definitely be a movie. Before I go, there's one more thing I'll bring up before I forget. You were in the Dark Side of the Ring documentaries, the Gino Hernandez episode. Any thoughts on that before we close this off?
Well, I was really glad that uh, Gino was remembered, and yes, I used to live next door to him, and he was a good friend. I saw, I obviously saw the episode, and there were a couple of things that I didn't. One thing at the very end was the crime scene pictures. I did see cigarettes and a lighter. I know it sounds really weird, but that made me think somebody was there, because Gino was, he hated smoking. He absolutely hated it. And he wouldn't have had cigarettes in his apartment. But I thought that the John Wall interview was good, and I think he did OD. I do not think he was murdered. And I was so happy to see his mum get closure. That was probably my very favourite part, when she had been worried for 30 years, and then she had a little margarita at the end. And the biggest reason why I really liked the boys for doing that on Gino is that his mum doesn't have to worry anymore. So I thought she was really cute, really adorable.
And of course, Dark Side of the Ring, it was just announced this week. They've been picked up for a second season. So who knows,
Yeah.
maybe they'll have you back to give your expertise on something else for that. But where can people follow you? You have Facebook, Jeannie Clark. I do believe you're on Twitter, but I don't recall the Twitter handle offhand.
I'm on Twitter at Clark Jeannie, and I'm on Facebook at Jeannie Clark or Jeannie Williams. Hey, Eben, thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful to you.
Oh, my pleasure. You're a great woman, very kind person, and hopefully we can check in with you again in the future. And I hope next year at the Cauliflower Alley Club, I might get to meet you in person if you end up going.
That'd be fantastic. I'd love that.
It's on patreon.com for $1.99 a month to watch our full shoot interviews ad-free and help our channel grow. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.